What's poppin', people? CJ Williams here with Culturalist Theory, and today we have one of the most requested lists. With over 40 million records sold and damn near 20 Grammy nominations, Snoop Dogg is arguably the most recognizable rapper in history. Today we take a look at his 19 studio albums and rank them from worst to first. Note, this will not include any soundtracks, mixtapes, EPs, or group projects. So no East Siders, Mount Westmore, or that joint project with Wiz Khalifa either. Everything else is on the table. Go ahead, hit that like button one time. We're trying to get to 500 likes on this one, please and thank you. While you're there, hit that subscribe button if you're digging the content. Alright, that's enough stalling, let's get to it. Number 19, Bible of Love. Now, it's somewhat unfair to call this Snoop's worst album, considering it's more of a compilation and Snoop is the curator. However, it is listed as an official album from the Dog, so it has to be on our list somewhere. And at over 30 tracks, 2 hours plus long, and the fact Snoop is only featured on a handful of records, we don't know where else to put the double disc gospel album but at the bottom. We do want to give props for diversifying the music portfolio, giving something his grandmother could be proud of. So we'll put an asterisk next to this. Deal? Number 18, Reincarnated. Okay, let's not put that asterisk away quite yet. We need it for one more project. Snoop Dogg dropped his experimental reggae album under the moniker Snoop Lion, spring 2013, along with a companion documentary by the same name. The film was about Snoop's journey to Jamaica and his exploration of reggae and Rastafarian culture. Not the first rapper inspired by other cultures enough to drop a musical project around it, and again, we're not mad at it. But it doesn't hold enough replay value to warrant it any higher on this list. Plus, Snoop's not doing what we know him best for, which is actually rapping. Love the story around the project, and the music isn't terrible, just don't think it's fair to weigh it against other more traditional hip-hop albums in his catalog. Shout out to the most random Drake feature of all time that nobody remembers on No Guns Allowed though. Number 17, The Dogfather. Okay, now we present to you the real worst Snoop Dogg album. We know the term sophomore slump or sophomore jinx gets thrown around a lot, and there's no better word to describe this album. The gap between Doggy Style and this is immeasurable. You'll see by the way we place that on this list. It's gonna be a minute before we get to that debut. But back to The Dogfather. The second and last album on the original Death Row Records, we can point to one glaring omission as the culprit behind this subpar album. Not 1 second of the album's graced by Dr. Dre's hands before it was released, and it showed. Also, this was around the time Death Row was falling apart. Dre left to start Aftermath, and Pac died just a few weeks before this album dropped. So to say Snoop had a lot going on would be an understatement. So for that, we can't hold this over his head too hard. Plus, he went on to have a Hall of Fame career despite this misstep. If you have to revisit some records on here, you can play, on second thought, just don't. Number 16, From the Streets to the Suites. When you have almost 20 albums to your name, you're bound to have some duds in the catalog. One of Snoop's latest, From the Streets to the Suites, would fall under that category. Clocking in at an uncharacteristic 10 tracks in just under 40 minutes, it's the Dog's shortest out of his discography. Not much on here when it comes to highlights. The best record is easily Get Your Bread Up, featuring Larry June. Actually wouldn't mind hearing more between those two, as they're a perfect match for each other. Other than that, it was good to hear Snoop still rocking with his group, the East Siders, although the record they're featured on isn't the best. So at the end of the day, this was a one and done listen that went mostly under the radar for good reason. Number 15, Bush. Snoop Lion returned to Snoop Dogg 2 years later in 2015, but not quite the way we remembered. Teaming up with longtime collaborator Pharrell, the Neptune's producer handled all production duties, and Snoop leaned heavily into harmonizing than rapping. The results, while not as impactful as previous smashes like Beautiful or Drop It Like It's Hot, were still serviceable under the right circumstances. Joints like So Many Pros, Edible featuring T.I., and Runaway with Gwen Stefani were enjoyable, as well as the Kendrick and Rose assisted I'm Your Dog. Is it Heyday, Pharrell, and Snoop? Not quite, but it's still straight. Special shout out to Charlie Wilson providing background vocals on most of the records, adding that extra layer of good vibes as only Charlie can. This one is worth revisiting, but may require more than one listen to really get it, if that makes sense. Number 14, Documentary. During a studio session with Swiss Beats in 2010, Snoop announced he was working on a sequel to his debut album Doggy Style. Apparently, he and Swizzy recorded about 18 tracks together and were possibly planning on making those records the album. Well, thankfully, he decided to change the title to Documentary, and oddly enough, not one of the final 21 tracks to make the album were produced by Swizz. First, we got to give props to Snoop for having almost 20 albums with no sequels in the catalog. Very rare for an artist not to revisit the title of their most popular work. As for the album itself, of course it didn't come close to said work, but there is some heat sprinkled in. My Fucking House featuring Young Jeezy and a scene-stealing E40 verse, Gang Bang Rookie, and Cold Game are the clear standouts. Outside of that, not much worth revisiting here. Well, look on the bright side, at least it's not called Doggy Style 2, because that would have probably pushed it down even further on the list. Number 13, Never Left. There was a time late in Snoop's career where despite consistently releasing albums, he wasn't as musically relevant as he used to be. But when you press play on his latest drop, you will be pleasantly surprised by what you heard. You can place 2017's Never Left under that category, as the better than expected album has a handful of records that gave us throwback Snoop Doggy Dogg energy. Fitting, seeing that the cover is a picture of the Long Beach rapper way back from 1992. Joints like Promise You This and Toss It stand out, and the album is bookended by two bangers. The title track kicks off the album with the flip of As Long As I've Got You, more famously used in Wu-Tang's Cream, and the album ends with Love Around the World, arguably the best song on the record. Also, there's the smooth 420 Blaze Up featuring Wiz Khalifa and Devin the Dude, which works as well as it sounds and should satisfy the Mary Jane fans out there. Circle back on this one if it slipped through the cracks. Number 12, Game Is To Be Sold, Not Told. One of the biggest rap free agent pickups in history, Snoop leaving Death Row to join No Limit was a huge deal in the mid to late 90s. The move would eventually rejuvenate Snoop's career after sputtering out following the disappointing Dogfather album. However, the first of 3 projects on the tank would be the worst, as it suffers from a slight identity crisis. P tried his best to blend Snoop's style with his Beats by the Pound production, and it worked to varying degrees. Joints like $20 to My Name, Ain't Nothing Personal, and Game of Life were W's, while sequels like Gin and Juice 2 and Still a Thing don't hold a candle to the originals. P would make the executive decision to loosen the collar up and let the dog roam to his usual producers on the next project, as this was mostly panned by critics. It wasn't as bad as some proclaimed it to be, but it also wasn't that great. Number 11, Kool-Aid. Returning back to his true rapping roots after taking a 2-album break with Reincarnated and Bush, Snoop called in favors from his producer friends to craft a very solid project in Kool-Aid. Legends behind the board like Swizz, Timbaland, Just Blaze, Rockwilder, and Jay Dilla contributed to the album, with the 4 Swizz records standing out. Other bangers include Super Crip and one of the stronger Wiz collabs in Kush Ups. So how does a stacked album like this still land in the bottom half, you ask? It's an excellent question. Partly due to the upper half of the catalog being that strong, and also the fact that the 20-song track list has its share of throwaways. Feel About Snoop, My Cars, and Affiliated or Skips, and a few joints could have benefited from being 2 16s instead of 3. Make those small tweaks and we would have had a top 10 Snoop album on our hands. Before we get to the top 10 records from the Snoop Dio Double Jizzy, the LBC MC has appeared in a ton of movies during his storied music career. Some were better than others. But let us know, what's your favorite Snoop Dogg movie role? Okay, we know it's really only between 2, but let's keep it a stack. He was low-key funny in that Soul Plane as well. Alright, back to the list. Number 10, Paid the Cost to Be the Boss. The first album after his No Limit deal ended, the appropriately titled Paid the Cost to Be the Boss would mark another new beginning of sorts for the dog. Finally out from under the shadow of a CEO figure like Suge or Master P, it was Snoop who was able to call his shots this time. Linking up with the Neptunes for the first time on the singles From the Church to the Palace and Beautiful, this will mark a long-standing relationship between Pharrell and Snoop. The latter being one of the biggest records of the year, being nominated for 3 Grammys, winning 1 for Producer of the Year non-classical. And who could ever forget the now legendary video filmed in Brazil? B-sides on the album that went were I Believe in You, Ballin', and the DJ Premier produced The One and Only. The album is also notable for containing the Suge Knight diss record Pimp Slap. On the song, Suge is called out by name several times, dissing Death Row and alleging he underpaid Snoop during his time on the label. Thankfully, Snoop and Suge would bury the hatchet and a song would come out of that as well. More on that later. But before we leave this album, we can't help but call out the song Lollipop, as it's quite possibly the worst Jay-Z feature we've heard. Actually, we can't tell if it's Hove or the song itself that's so disappointing. Either way, that song is a complete miss and is easily the worst of the Jay and Snoop collabs. Number 9, Back on Death Row. Talk about a full circle moment. 26 years after his last release on the label, Snoop Dogg dropped his 19th studio LP, not only on Death Row Records as an artist, but as owner as well. Snoop acquired the rights to the label in 2022 and dropped Back on Death Row to celebrate. Releasing the same week as his appearance in the Super Bowl halftime show, the 51-year-old vet sticks to the script and also expanding his sound via newer artists. Records like Pop Pop, It's It's in the Air, and Snoopy Don't Go, featuring relative rookies like DaBaby, Jane Hancock, and October London respectively. Strong features from familiar faces like Nas, T.I., and The Game are also present, giving the album a nice balance of old and new. Same goes for producers, as Hit Boy, DJ Battlecat, and Green Lantern provide the beats. All in all, to be in the game this long and still be able to put out a product of this quality without compromising your sound is an achievement in itself. With that being said, can we retire the Lil Duval and Snoop records? Living My Best Life was cool, but lightning is likely not going to strike twice, especially when they sound like the joint they have on here. Number 8, I Want to Thank Me. Snoop hit a major milestone in his career in November of 2018. Almost 25 years to the day of his debut, he was given the 2,651st star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. During the star-studded ceremony, he made it a point to thank those who helped him in his career, ending with a special thank you to, well, himself. He would title his next album to release in his catalog after that quote August the following year, and yet again prove why he is who he is. To be 17 albums deep and drop one of your better efforts speak to his longevity and high-level status in the rap history books. The numbers may not be the same, but joints like the Nipsey tribute One Blood, One Cuz, the DJ Mustard produced Blueface Hunnits featuring A+ hook from YG, and the smooth First Place prove when it comes to music the dog hasn't lost a step. He even buried the hatchet with one-time friend turned foe Suge Knight on Let Bygones Be Bygones. At 22 tracks, of course, there's gonna be some misses. There's another terrible Lil Duval collab in Do You Like I Do, and Little Square You Bitch You should have never made it off the hard drive, but still, a strong effort worth checking out. Number 7, Malice in Wonderland. Snoop has worn so many hats in the recording business during his 25+ year career. In 2009, he was appointed creative chairman over at Priority Records. Now, we're not 100% clear of exactly what that means, but we do know he would drop an album on the label later that same year. Malice in Wonderland would have minimal rap features, and its 14-track length would be a sweet spot we kinda wish Snoop would have aimed for more often. Speaking of the features though, the only rappers on the album are Problem, a young Nipsey Hussle, and a somewhat random Soulja Boy. The latter being featured on Pronto, which in addition to 1800 with Lil Jon, can date the album as that sound has come and gone in hip-hop since its release. They were still enjoyable records at the time. Standout record would come in the joint Secrets featuring frequent hook killer Cocaine. Seriously, he and Snoop have some bangers in the stash, and this is one of the best. Snoop would reissue the album in 2010 under the name More Malice with a few new tracks and some remixes. Gems on there were the Jay-Z featured I Wanna Rock remix, Bun B on the Pronto remix, and the Kid Cudi assisted That Tree. Add those to the original and it would have made a case for a possible top 5 slot. Number 6, The Blue Carpet Treatment. Taking it back to his gangster roots after releasing more commercial records the year prior. Snoop ditched the pop sound, and for the most part on Blue Carpet Treatment it worked. There's a ton of records on here like Vado featuring Be Real, Gang Bangin' 101 with The Game, and 10 Little Crips. There's still a few radio-friendly records, just not as many, like That's That Shit with R. Kelly and I Wanna Love You with Akon. Both were dope, by the way. He links back up with Dr. Dre for 2 records that also work well in Round Here and Imagine. The album is also notable for being the last Snoop album to feature Nate Dogg while he was alive. The album was preceded by a mixtape by the same name that featured a few new joints. One to check for was the Jeezy and Nate Dogg assisted banger Wannabes. Funny story about this album cover too. Did you know the original album cover featured the signature cartoon style Snoop on a bandana print blue carpet kneeling in front of his own Hollywood star? That's crazy, right? How's that for manifestation? Number 5, No Limit Top Dog. As we alluded to earlier, this was Snoop's second project on the tank, and there was a noticeable difference in approach as compared to the first. For starters, the album cover wasn't the usual blinged out pen and pixel style No Limit was known for. The sound was more traditional West Coast, and Snoop took his time crafting this. Reportedly, The Game Was to Be Sold was recorded in 3 weeks versus several months for Top Dog. The album would see Snoop reuniting with Dr. Dre for the first time since he left Death Row. The Good Doctor would lace Snoop with bangers Buck 'Em, Bitch Please, and Just Dippin'. Other contributors would be Meech Wells, DJ Quick, and Jelly Roll. Beats by the Pound lead man KLC would contribute the only 2 No Limit-esque beats in the form of Ghetto Symphony and Down For My Ends. Both were the only joints to feature No Limit Soldiers as well. The latter would become popularized after it was re-released on C Murder's Trapped in Crime album the following year. Shout out to our No Limit fans out there. We have tank-specific lists on the channel for you to check out when this is over. No Limit Top Dog was commercially successful just as the previous release, but the critics leaned way more in favor of this than the prior. Number 4, Ego tripping. An underrated facet of Snoop's skill set is his ability to adapt to different types of not only hip-hop but genres of music, period. No further proof is needed than his 9th album, Ego Trippin'. Originally meant to be completely solo with no features, thus the name of the album, Snoop would invite some of his friends, Charlie Wilson, Too Short, Pharrell, and even Willie Nelson along for the ride. You get almost every version of the dog imaginable here. West Coast Gangster on Sets Up, Dirty South Snoop on Riding in My Chevy, kickback vibes on Life of the Party, and up-tempo auto-tune sounds on Sexual Eruption. The diverse styles are supported by the strong production from A-listers like the Neptunes, Teddy Riley, DJ Quick, Raphael Sadiq, and Hit Boy. Snoop sounds rejuvenated as he admittedly had assistance with the pen from fellow West Coast MC Problem. Hey, no judgment here, we're with whatever gets the job done. Had Snoop trimmed the album down ever so slightly, and we would have had a fight on our hands for a top 3 spot. Number 3, Rhythm and Gangsta, the masterpiece. Parlaying the success from their Billboard hit Beautiful into a partnership, Snoop and the Neptunes would sign a 1-album deal and release R&G under the production duo Star Trek record label. The results will be a nice balance of, well, rhythm and gangsta. The former handled mostly by the Neptunes, as Pharrell and Chad contribute a handful of joints, including 3 of the 4 singles, Signs with Justin Timberlake, Let's Get Blown, and arguably Snoop's biggest record, Drop It Like It's Hot. The simple yet catchy banger would propel Snoop's already high profile into the stratosphere. And who recalls the remix featuring Jay-Z where he took shots at a former friend and collaborator?
Take it like a man, the flow ran you off the stage. Wasting your time trying to sue us, stop. Tell your lawyer, take that civil case and drop it like it's hot.
Leave a comment if you remember who that was for. Other records worth rewinding were The Business, Oh No with 50 Cent, and Bang Out. With the Neptunes executive producing, one would think they dominate the sound of the album, but they let Snoop live. He glides over diverse production from Alchemist, Sha Money XL, Lil Jon, and LT Hutton. The results will be a top 3 album from a legend in the game. Nice job, for real. Number 2, The Last Meal. Snoop's final album Under No Limit was a pivotal one for his career. Not only was it the last project under the tank, it was also the last record partially owned by Death Row Records and the first on his own newly founded label Doggy Style. The smell of freedom clearly motivated Snoop because he delivered the best material since his debut. Probably the least sounding No Limit album ever, there's only 1 song produced by Beats by the Pound. The rest will be filled by familiar names like Scott Storch, Timbaland, and Dr. Dre. There's really too much heat on here as joints like Set It Off, Snoop Dogg, and Lay Low have become fan favorites. And what about the chemistry between the Dog and Cocaine on this project? The crooner is featured on 7 records, and we wouldn't have been mad if he was on 7 more. He laces tracks like Stacey Adams, Wrong Idea, and the final song Y'all Gon' Miss Me. The album is stacked with quality records and is a very worthy number 2 album in his catalog, cause let's be honest, nothing was gonna top this next album. Number 1, Doggy Style. Introduced to the world as Snoop Doggy Dogg on the Dr. Dre single Deep Cover, then again after being prominently featured on the Chronic album, anticipation for his debut solo album was on 10. Well, on November 23rd, 1993, the man born Calvin Broadus delivered an essential piece of hip-hop work. 19 tracks with all songs produced by Dr. Dre. Man, when is the last time we got to say that about an album? Well, that makes this all the more special as timeless records like Lottie Dottie, G's and Hustlers, and Murder Was the Case sound as good today as they did then. And do we even need to mention the singles? Yes, we do, cause Gin and Juice and Who Am I were staples on the radio, both with accompanying classic music videos. There isn't much left to say about this legendary body of work, except that it's easily one of the greatest debuts of all time, if not album, period. Now, if you tried searching for this and other Death Row albums on your streaming sites lately, you'll notice that they've been removed. Well, since Snoop bought the rights to Death Row, he had the music taken off. He says he's building out a platform that will house the full Death Row catalog, that way artists and contributors can get paid fairly for their work. And if you know anything about how these streaming sites pay, it's a fraction of a penny on the dollar. It's really crazy. According to Snoop though, he is working on an unofficial sequel titled Missionary, also produced entirely by Dre. Maybe then we'll see the platform released in conjunction with that project. We've got our fingers crossed that we get that sooner than later. In the meantime, you can check out other West Coast lists that we have on our channel like this one, and subscribe so you don't miss the next. I'm CJ Williams, and I'm out.